All right. Good morning, everybody, or good evening, or good day, wherever you are in the world. Welcome again to another episode of Breaking Bad Careers. I'm Coach Peter. I'm here with Coach Eli and our very special guest, Leigh Nicholas. And we'll introduce Leigh in just a moment, but just a reminder to if you're new to Breaking Bad Careers, we are here to talk everything career and career management and leadership and anything having to do with your own high performance and the impact it can have on your career development and your career decision making. So quick intro, Coach Peter Hill. I'm based here in Honolulu, Hawaii. I am an international career coach. I've been doing this type of work for about 20 years and had the pleasure of living and working around the world in Japan and in China and in the UK, in London, and along this journey, I met these two amazing individuals that you see here on this screen. And Eli is another career coach who I met in London. And Leigh and I, where did we first cross paths, Leigh? Where was it?
I think it was London.
Was it London? Or
I think so.
You never came to Shanghai?
I did not. No, it was London.
Okay. So it was London. All right, cool. But anyway, so we are all three friends. We're all colleagues. We've all worked together, and we're here to unpack a bit of Leigh's story, to share some of her insights from not only coaching thousands of people, but also recently executing her own career transition. So anyway, off to Eli.
Yeah, Eli Beaumont here, international career coach as well, mentee of Peter Hill, and had a volatile career with 5 career transitions, which have all been extremely fun, that have led me to where I am today. I like to think they were successful. And through that experience, I've been able to support thousands of individuals changing careers across 90 plus different countries. And I have the privilege of continuing to support individuals on a one-to-one basis and running this amazing, guess what do you want to call it, live stream with Coach Peter Hill. And are very excited to have Leigh here with us today. So Leigh, let's just kind of hop in and we can give your self-introduction, but maybe do so from the lens of what's your career journey been like to date? Where are you from? How did you get started? How have you been thinking about your career? And we'll just kind of take it from there.
Yeah, who even are you? Well, I have to say, Eli, I think you've got me beat with 5 career transitions. I thought I had a good one, but I think I'm only at 4. So I think you've got me beat. But yes, of course, my name's Leigh Nicholas. I'm happy to be here. I love chatting all things careers and career development. It's certainly a passion of mine. I've been fortunate myself. I've had a 20 plus year career in a number of different areas. So I started my career in advertising, and then I moved into the recruiting space. When I was in recruiting, I discovered coaching, which I became extremely passionate about. And then I followed that to higher education. And then I have recently, as Coach Peter and Eli mentioned, made a transition myself. And I'm now a senior learning partner at a technology company in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So feel really fortunate that I've had quite a bit of variety in my career. And yet at the same time, when I look at my path, there are definitely some themes and some consistencies throughout that, at least in my head, make it make sense.
I'd love to hear some of those themes, right? Because maybe take us through like the bridges between each career decision and just kind of how you came up with the idea, how you justified the idea and validated it, and really kind of executed to test that hypothesis and that theory that this was the right move for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So right out of school, I began my career in advertising in the Boston area, and I spent a number of years at a variety of different firms in town. I was chiefly in the production realm of the business. So I was, it was under the umbrella of the creative department, which I loved. I loved being able to meet all sorts of really amazing people who to this day are still some of my most fun friends. And really enjoyed that part. But I spent about 9 years in that realm and started feeling as though getting a little burned out. I was working many hours, and I knew that ultimately, if there was somebody who was, on set of a, multi-million-dollar production set who had to make a very big financial call, that I was not the right person for that. So when I started looking at, wow, if I stay on this track, and I become, executive VP producer, this really isn't aligned with what I really love to do. So I started thinking, well, what is that I really love to do? And this was probably about 11 years ago. And I realized, well, one of those themes I spoke about earlier is I love people. I love working in a collaborative environment. I love being helpful to people, whether it's people on my team or then later in my career, people externally when it comes to coaching. So it was kind of through that evaluation that I looked at recruiting as something that would make sense as a next step. So from advertising, I wound up being a recruiter specifically for creative and marketing folks. So I kind of would explain it as though it was almost like a cousin, if you will, to what I had been doing. I wasn't completely out of the world, but I was doing something that was different. Really loved recruiting. Also loved, but the piece of it that I really loved was, again, connecting with people, helping people, being their advocate. And what I quickly realized is the piece that was not aligned for me in terms of the recruiting role was the sales piece, the driving, all of that. I more wanted to help all of these other people who are not getting placed. So then that's when I realized that there's something here for coaching, that I may be somebody who would be a really good fit for trying to help people along their own career journeys, as opposed to, being in charge and being responsible for placing a certain amount of people in a certain number of roles. So from there, I was lucky. The firm that I was at was incredible, and they had a essentially L&D branch to the business that they were starting up. And I raised my hand and I said, I really want to be involved in this. And I straddled kind of my current role in addition to some of those coaching responsibilities and facilitation, and really got a hunger for that. Went on and got certified as a professional coach. I just couldn't get enough of it. And then through my network, I had a close friend who had wound up over at Holt International Business School. And there was an opening for a career advisor. I had never been in higher education. This was totally an anomaly for me after being in the business world for 15 years at that point. But it felt like a real passion project for me and a real calling. So I wound up taking a chance, and they certainly took a chance on me. I did not have the background of, I think, a typical career advisor in the higher education realm. And I went over there in January 2016, and I spent, a really a great 5.5 years there coaching, as you mentioned earlier, hundreds of students from literally all around the world. And I don't know how you can feel as though you've got an experience that's any more fulfilling than that, at least from my standpoint, when it comes to loving to connect with people and help people. But then ultimately, obviously I've just made this transition. So kind of what led to that. I mean, I think when it comes to your career, you really needs to be in tune with when you start kind of feeling stagnant, when you kind of start feeling as though, wow, I don't really know what I'm going to be doing in a couple of years. Like when I look at the path that I'm on and I think about the things that I really love. And for me, it really is that, designing of programming, that creativity. And when you don't see as though you've got as many maybe opportunities as you would like to have that are in your direct path, I think that's the time that you owe it to yourself to start looking at what else is out there and what could be a fit, even if it's, as it was in my case, and I'm happy to speak about it, something that isn't even on my radar at this point necessarily, right? It's just, let's start having some conversations. Let's see, I know what I love. I know the skills and that I have, and I know the value that I can bring. So it's then up to me as a job seeker to understand and educate myself in terms of, well, what opportunities are out there that are aligned with what I know I love to do and what could be a good fit. So hence the beginning of my latest switch. And I wound up in learning and development.
So, Leigh, reflecting on what you just shared with your story, it kind of makes me think of some of the early conversations, or the many conversations that any of the three of us have had with our clients or our students, right? And it's this idea about career decision making, and one could call it like finding your passion, or finding a meaningful career, whatever label you want to put on it. And I've personally had so many clients, especially, the younger clients, who feel like, they need to figure it all out, like right now. They need to figure out like the grand scheme right now so that they can figure out where the ladder starts and then start climbing the ladder. But the three of us know it's not a ladder. It's it's way more organic. It's more of a jungle gym.
Chutes and ladders. it's all over the place.
It's a bunch of ladders, and you never know. You may not know for a long time whether it's leaning up against the right wall, right?
Yeah.
But what your story has reminded me of is that it's a journey, right? And it may not be until mid-career or even late career where we really, things really start to click.
Mm-hmm.
You figured out the people piece pretty early.
Mm-hmm.
You experimented with something, and then you realized which element was the most meaningful, which was helping the candidates.
Right.
And then you realized a really strong interest on the program development side and the delivery. Right. I know how much you love being in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. I mean, does that resonate?
Oh, for sure. And, I think the other thing I would say, just to continue on your ladder playground metaphor, is like there are multiple ladders, I think, as well. Like that's the other thing. Like when I think about when I've been coaching people in this position, because so many people are, right? Like I'm feeling like I want to make a change, but I feel totally stuck because I don't know how, because to your point, Peter, I'm looking for that first rung of this ladder, right? And yeah, I think it's really important for people to realize not only is there not just like one linear ladder, but there are also multiple different ladders that you can take in this playground that are ultimately going to help you along your journey, and I think while I am extremely happy with, where I currently am, I feel extremely grateful that I've wound up in a really excellent organization and a really good fit for me. I also think there could have been a few other organizations that equally would have been a great fit. And I think it's important that people consider that when they're in this place, only because I think that it can maybe dissipate some of that analysis paralysis of I need to make the perfect decision and there's only one right way, because it's just not true.
Yeah. So something that stands out to me here, right, is I think a lot of people feel like they need to climb down one ladder, go start at the bottom of another one, when really it's like sometimes they're leaning kind of right next to each other. Like you mentioned, there were a lot of adjacent aspects to the roles that you pivoted into. You're like, well, I have no business being in higher education. I've never been there, right? And a lot of people feel that way. Oh, right. I'm pivoting into a totally new industry. Mm-hmm. I don't really know much about this, but there are a lot of transferable skills that you've been able to build up that could really create a case for you to jump into that role. And maybe the industry aspect is something that you can pick up with pretty quickly on, right? So I guess maybe we could dive into that particular pivot where you went from the candidate side to more of like the career advising side, and really what made it possible for you to make that transition? What was going through your head? What were some of the doubts that you may have had of making a transition to the industry that you haven't had experience in? And how did you get over those mindset blocks that could sometimes arise?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that so resonates, right? It's that whole imposter syndrome that shows up when you're like, I've never done this. Someone's going to find me out. But I think the key is you have to really objectively assess, what are your transferable skills? So what have you done that maybe it's not a direct, exact background as somebody in this example in higher education doing career advising. But I think for me, when I was going through it, I looked at, well, what would be important? What would a very solid career advisor in this example bring to the table for a role like this, right? And it's essentially coaching our future leaders, right? I mean, these were the students that we were coaching, and it's having the ability to connect with these people who are ambitious and who are driven and who are smart and all of these things. And when then I looked at my own experience, while I hadn't done that in a higher education setting, I was doing that every day in a business setting with current leaders. So I think for me, it was being really clear, first of all, in my own head, and I believed it. So I could then be able to relay that to people I was having conversations with in the interview phase of, while I haven't been in higher education, here's what I am doing in the business world. And, I think the fact that in this particular example, I think the fact that going to a business school probably was a better fit for me than if I had been trying to go to, like an art school as an example. I wouldn't have done very well with that. But so there were those connections. But I do think if somebody right now is in the process and kind of listening to this conversation and thinking about it for, what would be helpful for them, the first thing really is to do an assessment themselves and think about what would make me a good fit for this. And equally, the other thing I would say is oftentimes I think the things that can make us get tripped up in our head and think, oh, I shouldn't move forward and apply for this because I don't know this industry. Flip that on its side and ask yourself that same thing. What's going to make you actually a better candidate than somebody else who does just come from this industry? And those are some of the conversations I had as well. I came with a different perspective. I was not coming from higher education and that was all I had known. I had known business for 15 years. And I will say equally in the role that I'm in now for the past couple months, I think my higher education experience is letting me look through a lens and contribute things in a way that some of my colleagues who, have maybe been in specific L&D in corporate, they don't necessarily have that perspective. And so I think there's a lot that initially could kind of freak you out when you're in the search and make you feel like I shouldn't move forward, like I'm an imposter, I'm a fraud, all of these things. But if you really take a deeper dive down, some of those can actually be some of your biggest value assets.
Leigh, I'm wondering how, if you recall, how you prepared to communicate your transferable skills when you made that switch from recruitment into higher education. Were you super intentional when you prepared for the interview processes? If so, how did you go about that, identifying your transferable skills and then knowing how to communicate them during the interview process to convince hiring managers to bring you on board into higher education?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think that, well, maybe you'd have to ask them. I'm not exactly sure, but my guess would be, I did certainly go through a process, and this is how I would coach students as well, is, first of all, just look at the job description and look at the bullets of the responsibilities that you'll have and what the organization is expecting you to be able to do. And for me, and really the step one for me, before I even was thinking about how am I going to convey this in an interview, my first step was, do I really want to do this? Right. So I think that's
Great.
The other thing I will say. That's a really important step, right? You need to be making sure that it's not just about somebody interviewing you and like you winning them over. I feel very strongly about this. You're interviewing them as well. And you need to validate if this is going to be a good fit for you before you even get to that stage. So, for me, it's looking at the job description, literally looking at every single bullet and asking myself, is this something I want to do? Does this, and I'm a big fan of paying attention to like what's resonating with you and what's making you feel like, oh, I've got a pit in my stomach right now. Even if you can't totally pinpoint the why, listen to that. Like that's your body telling you like this may not be the best thing. But for me, when I would read something, and in this case with this higher education position, I felt excited about, some of the job descriptions. And so that was my first step. Yes, I want to do this. And then the second step is, okay, now if I don't have direct experience, say working with, master students in a specific programming, what do I have experience with? And what's a story that I can prepare in advance of this interview that I can showcase? Either I have transferable skills or, I didn't do this quite, but I did this other thing, which is pretty similar. And, whether it's the size of an event, as an example, I haven't done a career fair, but I have done this huge networking event, right? And so the amount of participants was, around the same, like I was dealing with the same amount of logistics. So coming up with stories that are true of your past experience and really practicing those. I think people in theory, we can all say like, oh yeah, I'll come up with stories. Yep, I'm good. I've got some stories for that. It's a very different thing though, to be able to communicate those in a way that is eloquent and hitting the points that you really want to hit with the person who's interviewing you. So it's important to practice.
Mm-hmm. That's so something that I want to get a little bit more clarity on, right? So you mentioned this feeling in the pit of your stomach when you're reading something, right?
Yeah.
And I think that requires a certain level of awareness of your subconscious awareness, right? Where maybe a lot of people may confuse fear-based responses to things that are like intention-based, right? So when you read something and you're like, oh, I'm actually not good enough for this, or maybe I'm not capable. And then you're like, but that's a sign, I guess I shouldn't apply for this, right? Versus actually, the feeling of like, I don't want to do that task because it doesn't align with who I am, right? So I guess, I don't know if you have any hacks or ideas on ways that individuals can really like check themselves on a fear-based response versus something that's more of disalignment.
Yeah. I love that question. Great question. Yeah. And here's what I would say about that. I think, because you're right there, it can be tricky, that one that shows up that like talks you out of something. If I, when I've coached people on this who have been coming up against their fear with this type of process, I've actually coached some of the people to, we'll name it, right? So we'll say like, that's your imposter, or like, that's your gremlin, or, whatever it is. And sometimes they even name it like, that's Joe or whatever. And so then when the feeling comes up, it's like, is that you or is that Joe? Like, is Joe driving the bus or are you driving the bus on this? Because I think that you're right that the initial response may seem confusing and like the same thing, but if you're thinking, I don't want to be working in Excel for 10 hours a day, versus, I don't know if I'm good enough. And I don't know if both are icky feelings, but like there's a difference there. So I think, in particular, if you're fortunate enough to have a career coach and, like you guys, and you're working with somebody and you're able to identify, hey, here's this thing that is showing up for me in this process. And the first thing I would say is welcome to the human race, because we all have that. And, I also believe that the minute that we go to expand with anything in life, it's a perfect opportunity for all of our stuff to bubble up, right? And it's like, no, don't go forward, But the other thing that I say to people is the minute that you hear that voice, it's actually validation to know you're on the right track, because you wouldn't be hearing that voice if you weren't kind of like pushing yourself out of comfort to kind of be doing something new and something that you're excited about. And that's growth.
Love it.
It's kind of like our caveman brain that's trying to, it's like keeping us. Oops. Are we back? Yeah. So it's like just trying to keep us safe, right? And so it's like,
that's absolutely what it is.
I think, it is, right? And I think you brought up two interesting points. One is about having support, whether it's a coach or a therapist or whatever it might be, but maybe it's just a loving family member to remind you how awesome you are, right?
Yeah.
But I also think there's a way to, an additional approach or another part of the puzzle here is, when we're able to ground ourselves in our own narrative, that is evidence of these transferable skills, right? That is evidence of our ability to be adaptable, our evidence of our leadership, our evidence of our ability to be a great team member, for example. I'm talking about soft skills, but there are certainly hard skills as well. But when we ground ourselves in our own narrative and say, and really own those past experiences that exemplify these transferable skills, it gives us a bit more confidence when we step into the interview process, and it helps kind of keep Joe at bay.
Yeah. Yeah. Joe's trying to put everything off track. Joe is the name of my husband. I don't know if that's something I need to look into.
Oh man, we went there? No.
He's the best, for the record. I don't know why I used that name, but
It's a name
funny.
you're extremely familiar with. Yeah, but it's more of what that name represents for us as our inner critic, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
I guess what I fall into this too sometimes, right? And I'm curious, as a career development professional as well as a career changer most recently, right? We are known and notorious for coaching, supporting, giving advice, sharing best practices, etc. But when it comes to living that in our own job search, right, and having to face our own demons head on, it's not as easy as it is when we get to share it with others, right? So I'd love if we can dig into the human side of Leigh and her experience as a job seeker, and if we can just kind of deconstruct maybe the last piece of your search for this last role that you just popped into, and any human moments where you let your inner critic run a little bit rampant, or where you knew you had to do things but you found yourself maybe putting them off, or who knows, maybe you didn't, maybe you walked the walk 100%. But yeah, just curious if anything comes to mind.
I did not walk the walk 100%, Eli. I appreciate you trying to give me that, but no, I was basically totally analysis paralysis. And the biggest thing I was saying about the process, during the fact to, family members or what have you, was, wow, I have so much more empathy for my clients now, my students now. I always like to think that I did. I always like to think, but yeah, when you're doing it yourself, it's like, wow. So to answer your question, I think, even when it comes to, updating your resume and making sure that you're using, the most relevant transferable skills, as we talked about, the most relevant keywords for the roles that you're looking at. That in itself felt so daunting to me, that what I had to do was actually get a accountability coach myself, just a friend of mine. But I basically said, okay, I've got a lot going on. I had a full-time job. I'm a mom of a very busy 3-year-old. We've got life stuff going on, as everybody does. And I looked at a calendar and I said, okay, I am going to finish my resume, updating this and updating my LinkedIn by X date. And I had somebody hold me accountable to that. And that was the thing that kept me on track, because it would have been so easy. I can't tell you how many times I would sit down to do, some of these first steps that I knew I would have to do before I really got out there and started talking to people. And I would just be like having a staring contest with my laptop. And it's like, nah, forget it. I'm fine. It's totally fine where I am. Like, everything's fine. And so I do think that, for me anyway, I think in enlisting a third party to really make sure that you're moving along is helpful, because knowing that person was going to check in with me on that Monday morning was the thing that made me, do that, as opposed to binging something on Netflix when my son was napping on Sunday. So that part for sure, just kind of getting started. And then I think, I think interviewing in general can be a very vulnerable process, as confident as you can feel about yourself. And as much as you can say, logically, and I do believe this logically, but then there's of course the emotional part. As much as you can say, well, if it doesn't feel like a fit for them, then this wouldn't be a fit for me either. I'm, especially at this point in my career, I'm at a point where I want a win-win. I'm not looking to try to, break into something or anything. And, but it can be, it's hard when you have all of these, especially these back-to-back, and in the virtual setting too, it's like awkward a little bit. It can be. And so it could be very easy for me to, have some of these conversations and then get off and second guess myself and wonder, like, did I ask that the right way? Like, and then you write the follow-up emails and you don't hear the response. And it's like, I'm going to read 15,000 things into that and decide that I'm a terrible human being and they figured it out. So I think it's just, and actually what's funny is the process for me was actually pretty quick. And I know that there are processes out there from coaching many people that can be months. So you do have to find a way, and I really think it's, for me anyway, and I would recommend this to people I've coached as well, it's having somebody you can speak to, so you're not like flying down rabbit holes and believing all these conclusions that you're drawing, which may not be true at all or have nothing to do with anything. So yeah, lots of human moments in the process, though, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I appreciate I appreciate that story so much. I mean, I think, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. Sorry.
No problem.
I think all three of us can relate to, having students or clients who we have to kind of pull off a cliff from that imposter syndrome. They're going to find me out, reading the 15,000 things into a non-response or a slow response, right? And I was my question was going to be, well, did you enroll a career coach? Did you enroll support of some sort? And it sounds like you did. So that's fantastic. I think it just goes to the value of having that kind of support. I think I'm a huge advocate of coaching, obviously, but I think every coach needs a coach or two. Eli has his coaches. I have my coaches in my life, and this sounds like it helped to make your transition more seamless than otherwise while you were trying to practice what you preach.
Oh yeah, it was absolutely. And I think, just as I mentioned earlier, just that accountability piece, and I mean, it was very helpful for the emotional piece also, but accountability, I'm not sure, if I didn't have somebody who I had enlisted, I may still be doing what I was doing, because it was fine. Everything was fine. And yet there was, when it's time to make a change, and it's easy to justify that away. I think when you get scared and you have that imposter syndrome, and you have nobody holding you accountable, so it's easy just to justify I'm just gonna stay where I'm at and everything's fine. But I don't know, my thing is life doesn't have to just be fine. There's so much great things out there. And what's the worst that happens? I know it's easier said than done, but if you make because I know many of the people that I've coached as well, and I had a little bit of this myself, you wonder, oh, well, if I make this move, and then what if I'm not happy and I've made the biggest mistake, but so that's part of that journey. And going back to that playground ladders metaphor that you had earlier, right? So it's just all right, so now we just meander over to this other part of the playground and we wind up in another area. It's not, again, that's why I think it's so important that you brought up that fact. There is not one singular linear ladder. That's not how this works at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sitting in indecision is probably the worst decision we can make, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I said to, there's a former student of mine who has become a very good friend, and she and I actually are connecting again next week, but we were recently just exchanging emails, just catching each other up on what's happening in our lives professionally. And she said that there was something I said to her during a coaching session. And gosh, I think this was maybe 3 years ago when we were working together, that she keeps reverting back to, and then I reverted back to it myself in my own process. But it's action brings clarity, right? And how true is that? It's I think that's the other thing I would say in terms of advice. And I can't take credit for that. I'm sure somebody said it to me along the way. But when you are in that place of indecision and, ruminating about all the what ifs and all of these things, take a single action, even if it's small, even if it's just updating that resume, or, deciding that you're going to look at 5 different LinkedIn profiles of people who are in a role that you're interested in to see how they're branding themselves out there. Once you start getting into action, everything gets so much more clear.
Heck yeah. I'd love to just kind of jump in and deconstruct a little bit about around your timeline of making the transition you just made, because right now people are saying this is a really active market. This is a candidates market. Loads of opportunities out there. There's a pipeline shortage in the talent pool, so more jobs than job seekers for, whatever reason at this point, right? So I'm curious, what was the time frame that either you gave yourself or that ended up transpiring for this pivot or this transition? And how did you feel about that time frame? And also, you mentioned a shorter interview process or a quicker turnaround into landing this role, where I know lots of people are experiencing 6, 7, 9 rounds of interviews that are taking months. And then all of a sudden, indecision on that process, ghosting, people going quiet. It's ridiculous what we're hearing. as it relates to the candidate experience in this market. So kind of like a two-tiered question. Let's deconstruct your timeframes and maybe why you were able to do it in the time frame that you did it in, and then also what are you seeing in the market based on your experience and what you're seeing with your clients and students?
Sure. So sure, to answer the first part of the question, my time frame was very fast. And I would love to tell you both that it was something brilliant I had done on my end. And I think the truth is I just got a little bit fortunate. There was a role that was open and needed filling. It was an immediate thing. They were, building out a team. I will say, however, I think part of what can fast track a process is that word we all talk about, but networking, right? So if you know people within an organization, and I happen to know a few people in an organization, that can sometimes make your process, go a little bit faster. But again, I can't take credit for, anything I did in terms of the timeline. Like I got fortunate, and I don't even want to say it because I think maybe some of your clients, the 8-month people, will be like, what? But my process was actually less than a month between, and I got very clear of when I knew it was time to go. And I was probably telling myself 3 months, but it was less than a month. And then in terms of the what I'm seeing in the market, so I would agree. I think that it is. There's a lot of movement right now. And I think, I'm in this category as well. I think many people during COVID took this time to really do some self-reflection. And, am I doing what I want to be doing? I think this whole last 18 months has obviously in so many ways opened up people's eyes to many things. And many of those things have been priorities. And so, it's not only just, am I doing the work that I want to be doing, but excuse me, Peter, your frog is contagious, I think. It's not even just, am I doing the work that I want to be doing, but it's also, am I working, at a place where I feel like I have the flexibility that I need for my family right now? Do I feel as though the values that matter to me are also values that the company shares? And I think many people are reevaluating. And so because of that, you're seeing a lot of change in the market. And I think the other thing, and this is what makes me proud to be where I am now, just personally, is I think many companies have, with everything that's happened over the last 18 months, have really taken a look at some of their values and have decided to really focus on some of the people issues and some of the development issues and, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. I mean, all of these things, there are many companies right now who are not just saying it, they're really walking the walk on that. And so in order to do that, they need to, increase staff and resources in some of those areas. And so I think that's a long way of saying that I think there are jobs that are open right now in some of these areas that weren't really existing, or certainly at the level that they are now, a year and a half ago. So I think that's part of it too.
What's interesting here is that even though it was a month-long transition period, from time of like, okay, I'm ready to do this, to landing, right, because of networking, or whether you call it good fortune, there's a lot of value and time you took to do the reflection to really understand what it is that you wanted. You were, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, just because you've been in the space for a while, doing a lot of values assessments and, maybe correlations between what you liked, what you didn't like, which sounds like it's been happening over the course of the last 18 months or so, right? To come to the point where the decision became pretty quick when it was like, you're like, all right, this is it. This is the time is right. And then you were able to showcase your value in a way where, yeah, sure, this organization had a quick fill time for this role, which you can't guess where that's going to happen, right? You can do your due diligence. Companies that are in a high growth phase might be looking to hire much quicker. It also depends what you're looking for as well. But I guess it's safe to say that even though the process itself was quick on the decision to fill time, it sounds like a lot of work happened behind the scenes in order to get you to that space, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really good point. I'm glad you bring it up. Yes, I'm often doing self-reflection, and I'm often kind of checking in and asking myself, like, does this feel like it's still aligned with me? I'm somebody who really enjoys working. I really have enjoyed my 20 plus year career, and I plan on keep doing so. So I think that, as such, it's something I'm consistently kind of nurturing and checking in on. And so yeah, there was a lot of behind the scenes kind of thinking and getting really clear on, I think that's the other thing you can think about when you're in a situation. It's like, what's working? Because it's not all black and white, right? So it's like there are things that are working and things that might be great, and then there are other things that may not be working for you. And I think you have to be really clear on what both of those things are, because the last thing you want to do, I would always say this to the people I would be coaching, is you don't want to be jumping from the frying pan to the fire, right? You don't want to just like, I'm done with this, I'm just going to blindly go over here, and then recognize, oh no, all of these same issues are still here. So I think your point, Eli, is a really good one. You have to take that time to do that self-reflection, to know, because what was a deal breaker for me might not be for somebody else, and vice versa. But you have to know that about yourself so that you're going into something that's going to be a good fit for you.
In hearing you, in hearing you share this, and Eli, thank you. The question or the validation comment you just offered was super insightful, and it caused me to reflect and think about the various individuals that I've had the pleasure of serving over the years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think about the themes and the patterns of what is going to add or aid or lend to, say, a quicker transition, and what's going to lend towards a transition that might take that 8 or 9 or 10 months or potentially longer. And sure, okay, yes, market factors are one thing, but I don't know about you guys as coaches, but I've had clients who have found or made transitions relatively quickly, even in a down market.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I've had other clients who we've had incredible market growth, and they haven't executed quick transitions. Mm-hmm. And so, as you were talking, I was just thinking, like, I wonder if there's like this 1-2 punch here, like the one is that regularly checking in with oneself and really being clear on what we want in our careers.
Mm-hmm.
And the 2 is the consistent networking, consistently developing relationships along the way. Because, I mean, without a doubt, from what you've just told us, your self-awareness and the fact that you had a network in place
Mm-hmm.
added to your quick transition. There's no doubt about it.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And yeah, that self-awareness piece, it's like the more that you've taken inventory of your skills, your values is so big for me. Like if my values are being stomped on, or if the organization doesn't have this, if I'm not aligned, it's only a matter of time for me. And that's a personal thing to me. I know that, I've worked with some people that it's not as important, but I've worked with other people that it's equally important. So again, the point is just knowing like what your deal breakers are. But I think once you've done, a deep dive into those things that matter to you, along with the skills that you have and what you want to bring to another job, I think the other reason maybe that it can go faster in that situation is because the types of roles that you would approach are going to be better fits for you, right? Because you've like done that pre-work almost. So you're not like applying to something that then when you do a deeper dive, it's like, oh, maybe that isn't the best fit. So yeah, it's almost like doing that pre-work up front. It may seem like, oh, I'm not getting ROI on this, or like, I don't want to spend the time doing this, but I would agree, just from my own process and also seeing what other people have done, that. And then, yeah, your network. I know we say it all the time, but I cannot even stress how important a network is.
Yeah, 100%. Have a comment coming in from Celestina Hunter. Alignment is key for sure in a career journey. And I just thought it was important to highlight that, because if you don't know what you want, you can't get what you want.
Right.
And it sounds like, Leigh, you kind of really dug into values. You looked at your transferable skill sets. You kind of looked at the vision that you had for your future and what it is you wanted as a, not just a professional, but as a mother, as a wife, as a friend, right? And looked holistically at what balance looks like for you in life and career before you determined that this was the right next move, among a variety of other things as it relates to probably work style. You know, if you didn't like the hiring manager during the interview process, you probably wouldn't be there, right? So, you know, taking inventory of the team you're going to be working on, expectations of where you're going to show up at work, probably the things that you're going to actively be working on in the role itself versus things you've enjoyed doing in your past, right? These are all, and for anyone listening, these are all things that you should be writing down, or, you know, to be taking that inventory, because what Leigh's saying here is do the due diligence, figure out what it is that you want. These are some of the key points here. So, you know, write this stuff down, reflect on this stuff, and then you'll know what you're actively looking for and plugging these things in against whatever roles are coming up to make sure you're aligned, right? So, you know, it's sometimes not just enough to be playing these things in your head. Sometimes you got to just sit down, write them down, keep inventory of these things, you know. And Leigh, I'm just curious, what was your approach when it came to, like, was it more up here at this point, or did you have some type of, I guess, data management for all the requirements that you had for what it is that you were looking for? And if you kept that somewhere, maybe it's like a folder of different jobs that have piqued your interest over the last 18 months. Like, I just out of curiosity.
Well, that sounds like an amazing system. I'm tempted to lie and say, yes, that's exactly what I did, Eli, because that would have been smart. No, for me, it was more up here. But I will say I did have a specific folder, you know, that I was, my weekend time wound up being my job searching time. You know, as many people with full-time jobs can relate to. And so, and it was specifically mostly when my son was napping. That was kind of like what I was doing. And so, yeah, so I think keeping I certainly had a system in terms of, you know, people I was talking to and things like that. So I was being intentional about the process. But also for me, you know, going into a role that I did not have experience in with this, you know, particular title in corporate, even though I had plenty of experience doing very similar things like this, it was also really important for me to have multiple conversations with people in multiple different companies doing this type of work to understand, like, you know, because we all know you can't always necessarily trust a title, or, you know, what it is in one company is going to be very different than what it is in something else. So that was, I think, also part of that, you know, self-reflection and assessment piece of it. And so then I would keep my notes on that. And I am a very, you know, I can really trust when I get like excited about something, when something resonates with me. And so when I would make connections and have conversations with people about particular roles that they were in or roles in their organization, those were things that I was kind of keeping notes on. But I can't say I had the best system, Eli.
That's still a system, right? And you're doing some serious due diligence. You're taking in that primary research. You're really validating what individuals do in that role at one company versus another, and, you know, getting super clear on whether or not that is something you want to do based on the things you knew about yourself. So, you know, sometimes it helps to write them down. Sometimes you're super clear on it, and someone who has navigated 15 to 20 plus years in their career may have the clarity to be able to do that. So there's not one right or wrong way to do it, right? And not the same system isn't going to work for everybody. Just as it is with like the job descriptions having similar titles but being totally different, right? There's no one way of doing something. You just got to do what works for you, and I think that's just an important point.
Yeah.
Leigh, I've been thinking about maybe one last question to ask you, given that we've got just a little bit of time left, and I think the question I want to ask you is, okay, so you've talked about, you know, you have this 20-year career. It started in marketing, kind of the creative side. and your path has led you into learning and development, right? In tech, right? Which is a crazy growth industry.
Yep.
So what have you learned about yourself over this journey in terms of the impact you want to make in your professional career, the impact you want to make in the world? And how is your current role allowing you to do that?
Woo! Peter, I can always count on you to give a juicy one. Yeah, what a great question. Let me think on that for a minute. So I think, one of the, and I brought up at the beginning of this call, when I thought about like themes, even though, you could look at my resume and say, wow, she's done all sorts of different things. But to me, it's very clear because there was always a theme around helping people in every single job. So I think for me, when I think about, and there's a lot of other things there too, right? I want to have fun because that's actually a value of mine. It's not just something trite. I think that, we should be having a good time. But I also want to be, collaborative and creative and all these things. But being able to help people is something that at my core is just extremely important to me. It's something that I've always kind of sought out to do, even when I'm not trying. So, I think I really feel as though just connecting with people, inspiring them, whether it be, I'm very fortunate at my, current role that I have opportunity to do that through training programs and be supporting people and helping empowering people within the organization. That really lights me up. But, additionally, even a conversation like this, if there's a little tidbit of something that maybe I've shared from my own story or a piece of vulnerability from my path that may make somebody realize, wait a minute, I can absolutely do this myself too. Then that to me is awesome. So something where I'm just able to be inspiring folks. That's what I'm looking for.
Awesome. And how do I want to ask this? How these 4 transitions you've made from creative marketing all the way through, what were like the signposts for you that helped you discover this bit?
The signpost for me that helped me discover. Can you say it in a different way, maybe?
Somewhere along the way, you discovered it, and you went. You maybe you felt it for the first time, and maybe it was in your marketing role or your recruitment role, but you went, working with people and inspiring other people, right? And then along the way, there was another point where you saw the signpost and it reinforced.
I see.
You know what I'm saying? And then it became stronger and stronger, but there were like these really clear, I'm calling them signposts, but they were moments when you realized like, yeah, this is it. This is really it. And it reinforced it along the way. Did that happen for you? Or was it only like a one-time epiphany?
No, it's a great question. I understand now. Thank you. It was not a one-time thing. I will say though, it did not happen immediately in the moment. It was something that I initially enlisted a career coach myself when I was making the transition between advertising and recruiting. So this is back 11 years ago. And she helped me through kind of an exercise. Maybe this is something people in your audience are familiar with, but kind of like a peak experience exercise where you think back on some of the times in your career or even in your life, actually, when you feel like you're most in flow and you're most just like in it and you're in your zone. And then we looked at what are the commonalities between them. And so it was during that exercise with her that I was really able to look back on my advertising days and see, okay, it was the connections with people and the helping people bring their concepts to execution versus the actual advertising spot itself that lit me up, right? So I was able to see it through that. And then once I had the awareness of it, it became very clear. Like it became clear when I was then in recruiting and realized I'm having a really hard time with these 9 people that I'm not able to help right now and only focusing on the one that I need to place for the commission because I really want to be seeing how these other 9 people are doing. So it's almost like the glass shatters, right? When you have an epiphany of yourself, then it's easier to see in other areas. And since then, it's became very apparent to me that that's something that's of value to me and something that's really important and that really I need to feel fulfilled.
That's awesome. Awesome.
Cool. We have one question from an audience member here. She asks, what are some particular ways that you, Leigh, have empowered others?
Wow, what a good question. And thank you for it. I think what I like to say, as a coach myself, because at my core, that's certainly one of the ways that I would describe myself. I think that I most empower others by holding up the mirror for them so they can see themselves. And, the way that you do that really is by asking genuinely curious questions about that person and kind of helping them see their own brilliance, because that's so often what happens. So I think it may sound like kind of a non-answer because it's not this big magical thing, but I think honestly, just being an active listener and being able to be curious about other people and just really take the time to get them, that's when people feel empowered.
Yeah.
Giving me goosebumps.
Key to coaching, right? Is just, I always find like with the clients that I support and the students that I support, it's like, I don't know if you both operate this way, but I literally can see someone's potential as, whether you want to call it their aura or something larger than them, right? And it comes in from like a type of feeling you get from hearing the stories that they share, what they're going through, the resilience that they've shown in the past, whatever it may be, right? And it just, this potential energy is just kind of sitting there, just like behind them. And you see the possibility that they have for growth. And really, when it comes to empowering these individuals, there's only so much that a coach can do to like tell you who you are. You have to believe it, right? And I do think that by holding up that mirror, we allow you to see what we see in all of that potential energy that we hope that you could step into, right? And until you as career changers or individuals start looking in that mirror and just really seeing your potential and stepping into it without the fears or the inner critics getting in your way of seeing who you really are and being vulnerable with yourself and allowing yourself to give into the true love that you have for who you are and who you can be. And that's when the magic starts happening. And that's where, individuals like Leigh, Peter, myself, we can really step in and just kind of make sure that, you're able to see that and not just see it, but feel it and not need individuals like us in the long term to be able to live that life. So.
Yeah. I want to, if I may, can I just throw something out? I saw a meme the other day and I loved it. And I think it may resonate with some of your audience members now who may be feeling kind of on the fence of, do I take the jump into a new career? Or do I start this? And it said, be brave enough to suck at something new. And I thought, how brilliant is that, right? And it also takes some of the pressure off,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other thing I just want to say. You are never stuck, ever. It can feel that way, but you're just not.
Yeah. Fun conversation.
Yeah.
Love it. We can easily go on for hours on this. Knowing how much passion we all three have for this career development stuff. We're kind of geeks in this, aren't we? Why don't we tie a bow on this one for today, Eli?
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you everyone for joining us for another episode of Breaking Bad Careers. Thank you, Leigh Nicholas, who gave us some extremely vulnerable insights to her humanism or humanity as it relates to being a career changer herself, but some really keen insights on how she's really supported hundreds and thousands of individuals in navigating similar changes and transitions. So thank you so much for your time today, Leigh, and for your insights that our listeners today and anyone who feels like tuning in later into this session will be able to take away and hopefully, start applying so that way they can remind themselves that they are never stuck and that it's okay to suck at something new as long as they're making some, getting some motion and putting their careers in action. So, I suppose we'll see you back here in about 2 weeks' time for another episode of Breaking Bad Careers. And if you wanted to connect with Leigh on LinkedIn, and if you have added questions for her, would it be okay if they message you directly and connect with you? Yeah. And same goes for Peter and myself. Any questions that you have, we're always here to help. So, Thank you all, and we'll wish you well.
Hey, take
Thanks,
care.
Leigh. You're the best. See you later.
Thanks. It's good to see you.
You too.